36 new plants, which could supply 200,000 gigawatts of electricity, gigawatt hours of electricity, and keep nuclear at 20% of the country's capability. The current administration, the Obama administration, is obviously somewhat quiet on what role nuclear should play. But at the time of our report, some 31 different nuclear projects were on the drawing boards. Last September, the Department of Energy submitted to the EPA its plan to realize the requirement that disposed nuclear fuel be stored safely, are you ready for this, for 1 million years. A ludicrous requirement, but they figured out how to do it, okay? The disposal thing on nuclear is an absolute nonsense argument, by the way, in my view, okay? At my last check this summer, 20 new plants are now in more detailed planning, having submitted the complex paperwork, selected a site, and a specific reactor design. 12 are in the southeastern states, 3 are in Texas, areas where manufacturing is a critical part of a local economy. None of these are at construction phase due to the incredible regulatory hurdles involved, but none were on the drawing boards before the 2005 Act was passed. Only one is in the West, in Idaho. As you probably know, California maintains a ban on any new nuclear construction. Stupidity. For the balance, clean coal technology was recommended by our group. There are many sequestration ideas being explored. Even with this addition of coal usage, coal would drop just below 50% of electricity generation recently, capacity by 2030. We did not recommend any additions to the use of natural gas for the reasons cited above, but with abundant new discoveries, that might be revisited. We did not recommend any additional hydro plants, and that environmental concerns were strongly opposed to these plants, and you may be aware that there are a number of cases where dams will be being removed. For cost reasons, the remaining petroleum-based plants seem to be going away. Petroleum is not recommended as a source for any new electricity. So in general, our concern is supplying adequate, competitive energy in an environmentally sensitive a way as possible. My personal concern was and is that our lack of competitive electricity availability in many parts of the country is making manufacturing activity impractical. Manufacturing matters, not necessarily as a job producer only, but as an important part of the economic system. As mentioned earlier, a lack of electricity in the 1970s played a major role in wafer fabrication departing this valley. Today, with electricity costs exceeding direct labor costs, did you hear me? Electricity costs exceed direct labor costs for a modern wafer fab. The importance of competitive electricity is even greater. And as such, I assure you that for this and other competitive reasons, no one wanting to construct a new wafer fab is considering Silicon Valley. Many don't realize that most advanced manufacturing has the same characteristic. Electricity costs are a major operating cost. I could cite examples in China where plants are nearly lights out. There are virtually no operating employees, but the Chinese attract these plants based on an intelligent program of tax incentives and plenty of low-cost electricity. Recently, you may have seen a letter I sent to the Mercury News commenting on the fallacy of measuring progress by looking at electricity use per capita. But even weekend before last, a very smart fellow, Eric Schmidt, fell into the same trap. The fact that California leads the nation in holding and even lowering the electricity use per capita is not necessarily a good thing. Now that the NUMI plant is closing down, I assume that the county's electricity use per capita is getting better. We're looking at the wrong metric. That's not a good thing. Yes, efficiency of usage is important, but we've got to have an abundant supply of competitive electricity if we're going to rebuild the manufacturing base in this state and in this nation. As I said in my op-ed letter, Chad and Zimbabwe have even lower per capita energy usage. Is that California's goal? Or more importantly, is that the United States' goal? Electricity use per capita is the wrong metric. Don't get fooled by it. So, are we effectively attacking our energy problem today? I'd say no, because there's an elephant in the room. It goes by many names: climate change, global warming, carbon footprint, cap and trade, etc. It now dominates the entire energy development picture. Supplying a growing need for low-cost competitive energy is no longer the focus. Carbon footprint has taken over. Until the nation resolves how we're going to deal with this issue, I can't see why anyone would feel comfortable about investing in the energy industry if they are not in the politically correct parts of it. Like most people, I'd not given the climate issue extensive study. I'd assumed that the data was probably being exaggerated by some, but that there was some basis for much of the concern. When the cap and trade legislation came forward earlier this year, however, I and a couple of friends decided to dig into the subject. Economists, not the best estimators, of course, to be sure, estimate that if the 1,480-page Waxman-Markey cap and trade legislation, H.R. 2454, passes in the Senate, it will put a $10 to $15 a ton price on coal on CO2 emissions. Senators Boxer and Kerry introduced the Senate version just last week. This cost will be phased in, but look at the ultimate number. Today, the U.S. emits a little over 6 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's a $60 to $90 billion cost on the economy each year, and would raise the cost of electricity from coal-fired plants by as much as 20 to 30%. Yes, I know some say that only 20% of that will be exacted in the early days. That's still a huge additional cost for a commodity that is used everywhere in the economy. Among the activities my friends and I undertook to study the basis of this carbon's role in climate was a 5-hour meeting with a top climate scientist at a think tank that does extensive work for the government, where we heard their basis for being believers. Frankly, I walked out of that meeting being anything but a believer and anything but convinced that the science is settled. So I and my friends launched into additional study. I've moved from being uninformed to skeptical, and now almost what President Obama and many others are calling a denier. Not a denier that climate may be changing, because it always is, but that anthropogenic, i.e. human-caused global warming, or AGW as the in crowd calls it, is the leading cause or even a significant player in the change. Let me tell you why and encourage you to study the matter yourself, because if the crisis is overblown, we are in the process of incurring trillions of dollars, maybe $10 trillion in costs in the form of direct expenditures and lost GDP on a solution to a problem that is not well defined and may not even exist. $10 trillion. Now we lose track of the word trillion sometimes. That's 1,000 billion. That's a big number, okay? We're told that the science is settled. Well, if that is so, then why have so many scientists not gotten the memo? I include in those missing this settled fact a long list of NASA's top climate scientists who, in a report dated just June 25th of this year, addressed to the Congress, say the science question is still unanswered. The same report goes on to point out that in spite of the significant increases in CO2 emissions since 1980, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has remained relatively constant. The report comments that the dramatic year-to-year variations in atmospheric CO2 growth rates are poorly understood. But NASA is not the only source contesting the science. In March, Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma released a minority report listing more than 700 international scientists who dissent from the man-made global warming claims of the IPCC, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Many of these sciences were once connected to the IPCC. These 700 far outnumber those who contributed to the 2007 IPCC summary report. How then did it